What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Oscar Delahoya. Get this, Oscar Delahoya tears apart Hearn for allowing Canelo to fight Bivol. Golden Boy Promotion CEO Oscar Delahoya is shaking his head over last Saturday's fight between Saul Canelo Alvarez and Dmitry Bivol. Canelo, who is currently the undisputed world champion at super middleweight, jumped up to 175 and was outboxed over 12 rounds by Bivol, who retained his WBA world title with a dominant unanimous decision. Delahoya's company promoted Canelo over a decade, but the two sides had a bad falling out, eventually parted ways in 2020 after a brief legal battle. Since becoming a free agent, Canelo has worked with promoter Eddie Hearn of Matchroom for several of his recent fights. Recently, Canelo signed a 3-fight agreement with Hearn and Matchroom. As BoxingScene.com first reported, Canelo and his handlers passed on a 2-fight deal with Premier Boxing Champions, which included a fight with Jermall Charlo, and then a second bout would be against David Benavidez at 168 or Errol Spence at a catchweight. The first bout of Matchroom deal was last weekend's contest with Bivol. Canelo was then scheduled to defend his undisputed crown at 168 against Gennady Golovkin in the month of September. Delahoya saw absolutely no reason for Canelo to move up to the weight to face the undefeated boxer like Bivol because the Russian fighter is unknown and possesses a very difficult boxing style. Quote, he said, "The fact that the promoter of this event pushed Bivol on Canelo, it was the dumbest move in boxing history. It's not knowing boxing. It was the stupidest move. Whoever allowed Canelo to fight Bivol, I would have never allowed Canelo to fight Bivol," Delahoya said to Lance Pugmire of the USA Today. Look exactly at what happened. Canelo's on the top of the world. He's the king. Why fight a guy that Canelo fights 10 times? He loses 10 times. And he has nothing to gain, nothing to win. Nobody knew Bivol. It's the promoter's job to guide a fighter's career. It's your job to know what the best move is, to see what the biggest and the best fights for his career is. This was a terrible fight for Canelo's career. Styles make fights. Bivol's a great fighter, and no one knew who Bivol was before the fight. People are not even thinking of Bivol. We obviously promoted Canelo and were successful. The next move, if I were his promoter, it's to go back to 168, where you're the champion, have Triple G move up to 168, knock him out, and then be on top of the world again, said Oscar Delahoya. Let me counterpunch the counterpunch of Oscar Delahoya. I think, okay, Oscar Delahoya, it shows you that Delahoya, the way he picked fights or the way he navigated Canelo's career was solely to win fights without the difficult task of losing. Okay, that's what I see based on how Delahoya is explaining what Eddie Hearn guided or advised Canelo to do. First of all, though, however, Canelo, no one guides Canelo, okay? Oscar Delahoya should have known that when he tried to push a bullshit fight of a Gennady Golovkin 3 on top of him without telling him. Okay, that's a no-no. See, that's the difference between the promoters of yesteryear with the mentality they have versus the promoter that Eddie Hearn is with the mentality of today. See, Eddie Hearn knows he works for Canelo, not Canelo working for him. Eddie Hearn or Oscar Delahoya anymore ain't taking a damn punch in the ring. So they don't really make anybody do shit. Okay, so we have to understand that. Versus Delahoya tried to get a deal this big. It was a huge deal for Canelo, but he left out the details of fighting Gennady Golovkin if he wanted to or not. Okay, so Delahoya saying, "Hey, I would have never allowed it." Well, you can't make Canelo do anything. And Delahoya saying that he doesn't see what he had to gain. You didn't say that shit when he fought Kovalev. He beat Kovalev, yes, he did, right? So you weren't saying that shit then. Not don't go to 175. Think about it. So My thing is, with De La Hoya, it reminds me of the old school promoters and the way they feel about Eddie Hearn. And every chance you look around, there's Oscar De La Hoya talking about Edward Hearn, right? He's always talking about Edward. And it's like, okay, you can't keep this guy's name out of your mouth, but nobody know who this guy is. He said the same thing about Joshua and Usyk. Oh, he's running Joshua's career. Now it's Canelo. Oh, I would never allow that. He's ruining his career. I would have never done it. And then it just shows you the protection plan that Oscar De La Hoya had with Canelo Alvarez until it came back to bite him in the ass because Canelo Alvarez wanted to fight more fighters. See, De La Hoya didn't want Canelo to fight Erislandy Lara. He didn't want him to fight that fight. But the problem with Oscar De La Hoya, bless his soul, was he was fighting demons and like substance abuse. That's why a lot of times where he really wasn't around and he could have been. Like the Floyd Mayweather fight, he wasn't around. He wasn't even there for his fighter to support his fighter because he had to go to rehab. Facts. He had shit going on with his own life that he couldn't even support his own fighter. How you think that made Canelo feel? What if Edward Hearn got drunk or passed out on something and couldn't even show up for his own damn event that he's promoting? Right? First of all, what would have been said by other people like De La Hoya? Right? So, like him saying that I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have allowed that, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I know it's envy. It was jealousy. Now it's envy. Okay? See, jealousy is like pre-envy because Oscar De La Hoya and Eddie Hearn had a lot of fights together. The Canelo Rocky Fielding fight. There were quite a few fights where Oscar De La Hoya was that guy for Canelo with Canelo. And see, when De La Hoya was with Canelo, he had no problem, again, and that was in 2019. He had no problem with pushing Canelo up there. You know why? Because he knew Kovalev was a drunk. He knew Kovalev was over the hill. He knew Kovalev got knocked out by another Alvarez not too long ago. He knew that. And see, this is what these fighters do. These promoters do. They pick fights that are easy to give you the perception that these fighters are better than they really are. Okay, that's what happened. And what De La Hoya is saying is, you shouldn't take hard fights. No, Canelo took the fight. He took the challenge. You got to give your hat off. You got to take your hat off to Canelo Alvarez because he tried. He didn't hide behind his promoter like he used to with you, De La Hoya. De La Hoya didn't want him to fight anybody worth mentioning. But but this ain't about 175, and he knows it. This is about his fighter deciding to move on since he's a cash cow of boxing. He was his biggest client, and he doesn't have him anymore. That's what this shit's about. Okay, it's not about challenging and being the dumbest move ever. No, because Canelo calls his own shots. Eddie Hearn works for him. He should have knew that. If he would have knew that, he would have probably still been working with Canelo. If he did put his ego aside or his pride, because pride cometh before the fall. If he would have done that, he probably would have still been with Canelo and realized, look, Canelo, you're running the show. You're the boss. No, Oscar De La Hoya didn't think like that. He thought he was the boss, and he promoted this guy since he caught him at a young age. That's what he thought. And guess what? He was sadly mistaken. Okay, because he was awakened with some truth. And the truth is, Canelo don't work for De La Hoya. Canelo don't work for Eddie Hearn either. The only difference is Eddie Hearn knew exactly where his place was, and Oscar De La Hoya did not. But anyway, you guys tell me what you think of Oscar De La Hoya blasting, ripping apart Eddie Hearn's decision to allow Canelo Alvarez to fight Dmitry Bivol. Of course, tell me what you think. Please subscribe, and you guys been Counterpunch. Peace!